What is up, boys? It's your boy Nick down at the Rum Hut. I am doing a new thing today, and I think this is kind of the way I want to take this channel, and it is Dynasty Fantasy Football. And fantasy football in general. I'm going to start doing a lot of content, just football in general. I'm going to do kind of a mix, but I think I'm right now really passionate about fantasy football, and I've done it for so many years. And I think I have some good advice that I can share with the masses. Um, I've tried to record this video about 4 times now, and every time I do something wrong where I hit the record button and then just basically it stops recording, or I don't record the audio. So hopefully this is the whatever fourth or fifth time. This is the charm. So basically today I want to talk about the startup of your fantasy football draft. And that is going to be basically for dynasty drafts. And I'm going to kind of talk about mostly the way that I've been playing recently, and I think the best way to play. That's going to be, and a lot of this will kind of work for other formats, but typically when I'm going to be talking about super flex leagues. I think it's probably the accepted way to play these days. And it really gives more value to the quarterback position. It makes it a lot more interesting than taking 100 running backs or receivers. So, basically the first piece of advice that I always recommend when I'm doing my startup drafts is know who your league mates are. So what I mean by that is if you have a league of, say, it's all your buddies and they're really not they're big football fans, but they're not super into fantasy football, they may value players differently than say you or I or somebody who's picking in June would. So basically what you're going to want to do is, and if you are one of those people who's not really been following fantasy and now you're starting to, and you finally clicked on this video, this is how you want to play your league. So first off, you're going to want to go and find, I don't know, any kind of list of the top dynasty assets in the league. I usually like to use like Keep Trade Cut or something like that, where it's it's actually crowdsourced and it's based off of opinions of essentially every fantasy football player. So somebody might have a 99, like Jamar Chase is like a 99.90 value out of 10,000, right? So he's the most valuable, almost as valuable as you can get. So the main idea is you're going to want to try to accumulate the most amount of value as you can, because in Dynasty, you're not really playing for trying to get the best team immediately all the time. What you want to do is accumulate the most amount of value for your team that's possible. Typically, what you're going to see at the end of the most drafts is you're going to see most teams having the same amount or very similar amount of value as others, but you want to be the team that has the most. So how do you do that? How you do that is you don't really want to be reaching on certain players. So if there's a player you absolutely love and it's within that range of outcomes, like let's say you've got, and I know how everyone says tiers, and tiers is not so simple because there's lots of tiers. There's running back tiers, there's wide receiver tiers, and I don't really like to go that way. I think it's just how you personally value a certain tier of player in general, not like here's how I value wide receiver tiers or how I value running back tiers. And it's the way I see Dynasty, and it's a little different than how a lot of the other content creators see it, is it's not so much about what the position is. It's more about the value of the player. So if I see a Bucky Irving in the second round versus I don't know, Derrick Henry or something, right? And they've got similar values, and it could be somebody with a different position than that. I'm always going to go with the one that I think has the most potential upside, and always the one that I value personally the most in that same tier. Okay. The reason for that is it's not like your regular fantasy league where everyone just wants the best player and they want the most points. In Dynasty, you are going to want to have the most valuable asset, because there is going to be that potential option for trading down the road. So I see a lot of people, they see their roster and they're like, okay, I started with quarterback, wide receiver. I absolutely need to find this next running back down the road. But you're going to be passing up on a great receiver in that next pick. or you potentially are. Sometimes it drops that way. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it drops, and you do get that great receiver or great running back, and we're all happy, right? But oftentimes it doesn't land that way. So you take that second receiver, and then coming back around, everyone's taking all the running backs, and you're like, oh my god, I'm dead. What's going to happen? This is going to be a horrible team. Well, guess what? Since all those running backs are gone, there's a very good chance there's another really good receiver. And, in one of my drafts, there was a couple guys, and they basically went, and all they did was take running backs. They had a couple receivers, but they had probably 7 or 8 running backs that are all top end running backs. Guess what they're doing now, in June? They've already gotten rid of half of those running backs to get picks, to get, receivers, to get quarterbacks. So regardless of what position it is, you want to have the most valuable players. It is a little bit more sketchy when you're sort of going into quarterbacks, because a lot of times it is harder to sell quarterbacks, but wide receivers and running backs, those are your currency. Those are the guys that are going to be easily traded. Especially, like if you're thinking, okay, I'm going to take 5 quarterbacks. Yeah, you kind of screw over other players, but oftentimes they're going to look at your roster and they're going to say, well, he needs a running back, so I'm not going to overpay for, let's say a Baker Mayfield or a Drake May, or, any of those middle kind of running receiver or quarterbacks. So they're going to take a look at your roster and they're going to say, oh, well, he took all these quarterbacks, but he's got no depth. He's got no players. So it's very hard to move those quarterbacks sometimes. So that's my first piece of advice is don't be tied to what positions are on that you've drafted so far. Don't think that you need to have a well-rounded team right out of the box and ready to play the first week. I think you're better off just to have great value, great youth, and then go from there. And that kind of brings me to the other point, is always prioritize youth over sort of high-end production right away. What I mean by that is certain guys they'll go and they need to take Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey, or a guy who's established, a player who, has had great seasons, and AJ Brown. They're going to go and they're going to take those guys early because they know, or take them where let's say the ADP is, right? Because they know what they're going to get right away out of them. Personally, I'm more comfortable even a small reach. Like, let's say I'm picking at 212, and I know that a certain player their ADP is somewhere before my next pick, right? I will never reach for a guy that I know that I can come back around and potentially get. But let's say he's more towards the middle or the back end of the round. I am going to take a risk on a young player like a Travis Hunter, even a Teteroa McMillan, or let's say Bucky Irving, or one of those players. I am going to usually do wherever I'm going to make a reach. That is where it's going to be for a very young player with a high ceiling, right? Because right now that may be the perceived value, but those players are the easiest to trade. Even next year, if they have a bad year, a rookie or a second year guy, they're going to be fairly easy to trade because they're 21, 22. They're probably still in a decent situation, especially if they were given high draft capital, like a first round pick or a second round pick. Those guys are going to be very easy to move off of, even if you have to. But on the other hand, if you don't get those guys, they are impossible to get. I've tried to trade for Hunter. I've tried to trade for Bucky Irving. I've tried to trade for, a lot of guys that I really like. You are not really able to get these guys. And if you do, you are paying a lot for them. You're going to be paying multiple first round picks oftentimes, or, multiple picks plus a player. And you don't really want to be the guy paying that. So I prefer to be on the other side of that and have these other people who are throwing out these crazy offers for these players. Another piece of advice that I want to suggest is when you're in your later rounds of your draft, there's 2 types of players that I really, really like to take. First off, I like to take handcuffs. Handcuffs are always, especially high-end handcuffs. So let's say like Isaac Guerendo, a Ray Davis, you name it. There's a bunch. There's all the Baltimore running backs. There's going to be Blake Corum, Jarquez Hunter, those kind of guys. Those are the kind of guys that I do prioritize a lot in my later rounds of my draft, rather than taking a third, fourth string receiver. I really like to have those kind of guys because there is going to be injuries, and we don't know how these running back rooms are going to play out. Even if you have to stash them on your taxi squad for a while, there is a good chance that a lot of these guys may get the job in the future, or they get picked up by another team and they are given a starting role with another team. So they're players that are only going to really gain value, especially if there is an injury, but they're not really going to lose value unless, say, in a year or two down the road, they bring in another player to replace them, or they get cut, right? So it's a low risk, high reward, really low risk, really high reward. The other type of player I like to take low in the draft is a lot of rookies. There are certain guys that I know that are in good situations, maybe low picks. Like, I've drafted a ton of Brashard Smith. That's the first one that comes to mind. Jordan James. There's a few guys that I know were drafted pretty late on in the draft. I think there's Deontay Thornton I really like. There's a lot of guys that kind of fall in those lower end of the draft. I do feel a little bit more comfortable taking running backs in those later rounds rather than receivers, just because typically if a receiver, in my mind, is really, really good, and I think they have a chance to potentially become a starter and the level of a first receiver or a second receiver, I think they're typically going to be drafted a little bit higher in the draft. But whereas a 7th round pick, I mean, there's even been undrafted guys who come and make huge impacts, and it's the same with receivers, but it's been a little bit less so. So I do like to stash a bunch of running backs more towards the end of the draft. There's lots of volatility with the running back position, lots of injuries, and I think that you might be happy with essentially having some of these handcuffs, even if for a couple weeks at a time, and being able to fill out some of your flex positions. That's basically all that I have today, guys. Kind of rambled on. It looks like I went on for about 12 minutes. So I want to keep these videos kind of short and sweet so people can just sort of listen to them or watch them, and hopefully get a little bit further ahead in your fantasy drafts. Once again, thank you for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe if you liked, and if you want me to keep making more of these videos. Peace.